This is an unreleased episode of Peppa Pig that was never aired on TV, The Dark Temptation. It all started as a normal day. Peppa and her family were living their usual life, playing and enjoying themselves. But that day was different. Peppa was playing in her room, and George was building a tower with blocks. Everything seemed calm and peaceful, but this peace was just an illusion. That day, Peppa started to notice something strange. Her parents seemed different, distant. There was something in the air, an unease that couldn't be ignored. Peppa felt like something was slowly changing in their house. It wasn't until she saw her parents sneaking off to the kitchen late at night that she started to realize what was going on. They were eating these strange, shiny, colorful candies. Peppa didn't know what they were, but she could tell something was wrong. These candies weren't like any sweets she had ever seen. They were almost magical, glowing with a strange light. At first, it seemed harmless, but as the days passed, Peppa saw her parents changing. They became irritable, distant, and cold. The candies seemed to take hold of them, transforming them into something unrecognizable. Her dad, once loving and caring, now sat in the kitchen all day, stuffing his face with the glowing candies, his eyes growing dull. And her mom was no longer the warm, comforting figure Peppa remembered. She was always on edge, angry and withdrawn. One night, when Peppa woke up from a strange dream, she saw something that sent a chill down her spine. In the kitchen, her parents were no longer themselves, their faces twisted into monstrous shapes, their eyes black as night. Their bodies seemed to grow and warp, as if the candy had turned them into something else, something terrifying. Peppa tried to scream, but no sound came out. She couldn't understand what had happened. The thing that had taken her parents, these strange candies, was not just a simple addiction. It was like a dark force that consumed everything in its path, turning her family into creatures of rage and hunger. The next morning, Peppa found the kitchen empty. Her parents were gone. The candies, now all over the floor, seemed to mock her, their glow pulsating like an ominous heartbeat. Days passed, and Peppa grew more and more desperate. The village was in turmoil, and strange rumors began to spread. People said the candy had started showing up in local shops, mysteriously appearing on shelves where they'd never been before. Children were buying them, and their parents didn't know what was happening. The townsfolk grew ill, and some even disappeared. Peppa's heart sank when she saw a news report on the television. The reporter spoke of a strange new candy that had appeared in the village. People who ate them began to act erratically, and many of them died or disappeared. The reporter spoke of the dangers of these magical, cursed candies, but it was too late. The damage was done. The report concluded with a chilling message. The candy's origins remain unknown. Deleted episode of Peppa Pig. It was not worth going there. A cheerful atmosphere filled the house. Peppa, George, and Susie were gathering to watch a new cartoon. Mommy Pig was preparing treats, and Daddy Pig was telling funny stories. Suddenly, a strange creak sounded inside the house. Peppa and Susie exchanged glances, smiles fading from their faces.
"What was that?"
asked Susie.
"Probably just the wind,"
replied Peppa, but her eyes looked worried. The children decided to explore the house. In the bathroom, they noticed an old pipe pulsing slightly, emitting an ominous sound. Cracks were visible on its surface. Peppa, unable to resist curiosity, stepped closer. Suddenly, the pipes began to shake, and whispering voices called out from within.
"Come down to us,"
they seemed to say from deep inside, and Peppa felt a shiver run down her spine. At that moment, Mommy Pig returned and sharply said,
"Children, don't go too close to the pipes.
Her voice sounded frightened,
These pipes could be dangerous."
but her warning only heightened their fear and their excitement. Unexpectedly, the pipes started stretching out like living creatures and grabbed George.
"Help!"
shouted Peppa. Susie rushed to help, but was also caught.
You won't escape.
A sinister whisper echoed, and Peppa realized they were trapped.
What to do? We can't leave!
Cried Susie. Peppa watched as the pipes pulled George into darkness. Peppa! Susie! He called out as his voice faded away behind the wall. Peppa and Susie were terrified.
Don't let go of each other!
Shouted Peppa, but it was too late. They felt cold tentacles of the pipes wrap around them, and soon they too were pressed against the wall, unable to move. At that moment, Mommy and Daddy ran into the bathroom, but upon seeing what was happening, they froze in horror.
Peppa, George, run!
Shouted Mommy Pig, but now the pipes began stretching toward them as well. The parents tried to run, but it was too late. The pipes seized them and they disappeared into darkness. When everything fell silent, only empty walls remained in the bathroom. Peppa and Susie, pressed against the wall, watched as the pipes became still again. Fear and despair flickered in their eyes. They understood that they had lost not only George, but also Peppa's parents. Peppa P. Deleted episode, The Wormhead. This episode was never aired, but some say it existed. It all started with a simple phrase. Peppa, don't bite your nails, Mom said. Otherwise, worms will start. Peppa grinned. But after a day, she started itching behind her ear. She scratched and felt a small bump. Soft, slippery. It was as if something was moving under the skin. By morning, a pink growth appeared in place of the itch. He was throbbing, he was breathing, and then he started to move. Peppa was looking in the mirror, and I saw a second head grow on her neck. Only it wasn't a head. It was a worm, with black eyes, with a wry smile, and with a voice similar to her own.
You're not alone now,
he whispered. Mom came into the room and didn't notice anything. Are you going to breakfast? Peppa opened her mouth, but it wasn't her who spoke. The worm spoke.
We're not hungry. We're already eating.
Everything has changed since that day. George got a rash. Dad scratched his ear until it bled. Mom just stared at one point. On the third night, the whole family was sitting at the table. Everyone has their own worm on their shoulder. They were silent. The worms were moving, and they were laughing in other people's voices. Peppa looked in the mirror. Now she couldn't tell herself apart from the worm. They became one being.
It's just you, the spectator,
they whispered. The last frame shows the screen slowly filling up with crawling worms. They come from inside the screen, as if they want to get into your room. Deleted episode of Peppa Pig, Secret Disappearance. It was an ordinary sunny day. Peppa was playing in the garden with Rebecca. Suddenly, she noticed that her friend Rebecca had disappeared. She looked around. No one was there. The garden was silent. Peppa began searching for Rebecca all over the garden. Suddenly, she spotted a silhouette of her friend behind a large tree. The figure stood still, as if frozen. Rebecca's eyes were black as a bottomless abyss, and her face seemed made of shadow, as if it was dissolving into the air. When Peppa took a step closer, the silhouette suddenly vanished. At that moment, everything around started to distort. The trees appeared blurry. Sounds became muffled and echoed in her ears. Peppa felt a chill down her spine and a slight shiver, as if something sinister was approaching. Peppa tried to scream, but her voice got stuck in her throat. The figure began slowly approaching her, disappearing and reappearing again, as if playing a game of cat and mouse. The world around her started glitching more intensely. Colors blurred. Space seemed endless and unreal. At this moment, the figure disappeared just as suddenly as it had appeared. Suddenly, Rebecca ran out from behind the tree. She was running after Peppa with a desperate look in her eyes. Terrified, Peppa ran toward Rebecca's house. Inside, she saw a family of rabbits.
Something's wrong with Rebecca. She looks very strange.
Their faces were terrifying, twisted features, eyes glowing red. Rebecca's parents turned slowly toward her with mad eyes and asked,
Who is Rebecca?
The deleted episode of Peppa Pig, the Porcelain Doll. Peppa finds an old, dusty toy box in the attic. Inside is a large doll with a porcelain face, but it doesn't have a face, just a smooth white oval. What a strange doll, says Peppa, looking at her. George looks at the doll with apprehension and hides behind his mother. At night, it seems to Peppa that the doll is looking at her. She hears quiet whispers from her room, even though no one is there. The next morning, the doll is in a different place. Peppa tries to get rid of the doll,
But it always comes back.
One day, while playing with George, Peppa draws the doll's face with a marker pen. At first, it's funny, but at night, the face on the doll changes. Now it's an evil grimace with sharp teeth and glowing red eyes. Peppa is terrified. She realizes that the doll is alive and something bad is happening. She runs to Mama Piggy, but she doesn't believe her. At night, Peppa wakes up from the cold. She sees a doll by her bed. The doll stretches its porcelain hand towards her. Peppa screams, but no one comes. In the morning, Peppa disappears. George is playing alone in the garden, but he is no longer grunting with joy. He holds a faceless doll in his hands. Piggy's mom and dad are standing at the window, their faces full of despair. Their voices are barely audible. Where is our Peppa? Deleted Peppa Pig, episode The Neverending Rain. This episode was never shown on TV. It all began on a typical rainy day. Peppa, George, and Mummy Pig were watching the rain pour down from the window. The usual calming sound of the rain was there, but something felt off. The rain just kept coming, louder and stronger, as if it had no intention of stopping. As the day passed, Peppa noticed that the rain wasn't just falling. It seemed to be moving on its own, swirling in unnatural directions. Peppa tried to go outside, but no matter where she went, the rain followed. George ran to Mummy Pig, but the rain had already entered the house. It was dripping from the ceiling, seeping through the walls. The house was getting wetter by the second. Mummy Pig wasn't worried, though. She simply looked up and said, "Don't worry, Peppa, it's just the rain. It's been here before." That night, Peppa heard faint whispers coming from the bathroom. She could barely make them out, but it felt as if the sound was coming from behind the mirror. She crept inside and froze. Her reflection was grinning, a wide, stretched smile that didn't belong. Suddenly, it moved fast, slamming its hooves against the glass. Cracks started to form. The screen flickered, and for a moment, everything went black. When the picture returned, it was morning. Mummy Pig walked into the bathroom, and Peppa stood by the sink, brushing her teeth like nothing had happened. But just before the scene faded, the mirror showed two Peppas, one brushing her teeth, and the other behind the cracks, still grinning. The episode ended with no credits, just a silent black screech.